we never planned this stuff. It just all kind of flows out.
Yeah, that worked out really well.
What we say to each other cannot be divisive.
Gosh, I just think that when we get so focused on walking the line and just miss so much of God's creativity.
We only created the Odd Show to have this conversation.
Right.
We're gonna say some bad things about stuff. If you're
Not bad things like,
if you're a huge Toby Mac
turn it off now.
Or for people who are struggling with why would a God of the universe care about me individually? You are his favorite. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is The Odd Show. Let's get right into it. Here's your hosts, Bruce Bugano and Thomas Hogan. Hey, welcome to The Odd Show. We are back with another episode. As always, I'm Bruce, and with me is Thomas.
Hey guys, the G is silent.
And today, I think this is our first guest for this new season of The Odd Show. And we have a friend, Heather Goodman, and we'll kind of let her tell you a little bit about herself. But I think Thomas has known Heather a little bit longer than I. I've known Heather for a couple of years, year and a half. We met online. This is the first time we actually get to talk in person. And I will say this, that Heather Goodman is actually her pseudonym. There's no video of her, and that's intentional because some work that she's called to work in the Middle East, and with protecting her and just the work that she's going to be engaged in over there. It's important that she have a minimal online presence, that her face isn't shown, and that she uses a pseudonym. So we're going to respect that, and we're excited.
It has nothing to do with shampoo or conditioner. I want to point
So-
that out.
Heather is my real name, so that part's not
Right. No. Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's good.
Right.
So this is Heather. This is Heather Goodman.
Hi.
Living. So Heather, you want to tell us just a skosh, a tad about yourself? Like a little bit of background, who you are.
Well, I just turned 43 years old last week, and I am Jewish
Happy
by
birthday.
birth. Thank you. I'm Jewish, and I've spent pretty much all 43 of those years single until just about 2.5 weeks ago. I got married.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And
Huzzah.
I kind of seem to stand at the intersection of everything. If there are two viewpoints, I'm probably standing somewhere in the middle of the two. So that's my unique vantage point on most things in the Christian world anyway, is somewhere between two extremes.
No, can we clarify too? You're a Christian. You're
Right.
a Christian. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a follower of Jesus. Christian is a convenient label at times. I don't always choose to use it, but I'm definitely a believer and a follower in Jesus Christ, the Messiah. So yes.
And I'll tell you, one of the things that I've loved about just being friends on Facebook and getting the provocative, that intersection, it's clear, in some of the stuff that you share and just the conversations that you initiate. And I've appreciated that. And it's challenged me often because I like to think that I stand at the intersection of a lot of issues. And maybe I don't. Maybe Thomas is stop.
Okay, I think that Bruce probably stands at the intersection of proper Christian practice and apostasy. Yes.
Well, I've definitely spent my club membership over in the apostasy club on many occasions. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I stopped paying my dues, and that became a big issue with both sides.
Yeah, it does work that way. When you discover that your apostasy isn't even enough apostasy.
I know. I would say that's an accurate picture of the Odd Show. We present ideas and discussions that we're having as Christian adults, and the way we're approaching, whether it be fatherhood, parenthood, friendships, the church itself, and we try to juggle out what that actually looks like in real life. And often what it looks like in real life is not what it sounds like or is stated as in a theological framework that, you know, maybe a seminary might teach or that somebody might hear from a sermon. It's not the same thing.
Good word. I think, you know, I just said to somebody today that a little while ago, I realized that I stopped trying to be spiritually correct. You know, like you hear a lot about politically correct.
Right, yeah.
You know, and I don't mean that I don't care what God thinks or that I'm not trying to actually, you know, accurately portray him, because I do very much care about those things. But when it comes to being alive and being a person and having emotions and trying to flesh out what it means to, you know, relate to people and to relate to the church and relate to this world, you know, you get this whole script handed to you about like how you're supposed to react to things, how you're supposed to think about things. And at some point I kind of just tossed that script away. So, you know, starting to, you know, to just live from my core, from the authentic me, and you know, and not so much self-moderating whether or not it's okay to have this feeling or this opinion or this viewpoint, you know?
So, no, that's perfect. That's probably what we're going to subtitle this episode as, is not spiritually correct. So I wanted to introduce the topic that were the couple of topics we're going to touch on, and then we just want to let you jump in and say whatever you want. So talking about your individual authenticity. So I met Heather probably a little over 2 years ago online, mostly through. So I'm really impressed with the modern version of Jesus Feminists, or Rachel Held Evans, who I love and adore and think is just doing phenomenal stuff, not just for the kingdom, but on a personal level, just affecting people's lives in a meaningful way that's directed towards Christ, which is awesome. And then that through that kind of connection, I started looking at other people who are declaring themselves as Jesus feminists. And so then that's kind of how I stumbled into Heather. And then another friend of mine who's super into social justice online, Brett Fish Anderson, had a couple of correlating thoughts. And just after piecing all that together online and trying to follow the rabbit trail of where these ideas originate from, a lot of your posts are actually jumping off points for other people, whether they directly point to it or not, which is kind of the way I like to do things anyway, are directly from you, of just saying, hey, why doesn't anybody ever talk about this? Or why isn't this a topic of discussion? Or this actually makes a lot of sense to me, and I don't understand why that's not a common thing to talk about in the church. I think it should be open game or fair game for people to have that discussion. So that's one of the things I appreciate about you so much. And then jumping into the difficult side of this, and really hearing your story over the last few years about where you've come from through the desert or wilderness of singleness into a mature relationship, not just with your faith, but also combining that with another person, and then the journey you're going through right now to be impregnated. So that whole process has been just phenomenally insightful, and I really want our audience to kind of appreciate and see from your perspective what that looks like. So jump in, just wherever you want to start.
And your listeners are probably wondering why on earth you just said that my journey is towards being impregnated. Like, that's not usually what you say when someone just got married.
Is that not the best way to say it?
I mean, it's perfectly accurate in my situation, but it probably came across as a shock to anyone who doesn't know yet that we're going to be talking about IVF. So
right. So Thomas, clarify that. We're going to talk about, because you're like, I'm going to intro the topipics. We're going to talk about singleness, because Heather has this very unique and
the
wise.
topic is Heather becoming impregnated. I thought that was the topic.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
But singleness, we're going to talk about that.
And the path that she's going to take to get there.
And also IVF, which is in vitro fertilization.
Right.
That, yeah.
I'm sure that would have came out during the discussion.
This is not a discussion about the birds and the bees. We're not doing that. Like, you're old enough.
Heather, go into as much detail as you're willing to go into.
Right.
So can we talk about? Look, can we open with the singleness part? Because a few years ago we were going to talk about that, and like that so intrigued me, because I know how Christians view singleness often, and you got to go into your 40s. Not got to. I don't know. Like
right.
Yeah, excited.
Yay.
Yeah, and got to you experience this. So
yeah, I mean, I was and just being really vulnerable here, you know, when I was in high school, even middle school, I was always the kid sitting at the very unpopular lunch table, you know, and I don't know if that's due to a personal characteristic or if that's just, you know, I was singled out for bullying for no characteristics, probably a combination of both. But, you know, when I think schools today are, you know, catching on to the whole idea of kids being excluded and bullying and things like that. The church, not so much. You know, like I've still encountered going up to, you know, leaders and saying, look, like, I feel like you have an in crowd and an out crowd in this church. Is there something we can do to kind of, you know, help me and maybe some other people that are more socially inept to be more included? And usually that's met with a whole bunch of defenses, deflections, and even, you know, counter accusations like, you know, you just need to get rid of your rejection spirit or whatever. So I think I always knew heading into life that finding a spouse might be a little bit difficult for me. Because, you know, if you're not popular in high school and college and so forth, you know, maybe you're going to have difficulty finding that one person too. One thing I noticed though is, and I even had to look at myself in this, was that there's a tendency to assume that one, you know, less popular person is immediately going to find another not so popular person to be, you know, their answer or, you know, an attractive person to them. And so, you know, I'd say that maybe there were like 2 times in my life that somebody tried to hook me up with someone. I wish there were more. I wish more people had tried to introduce me to people. But I have to say that the 2 times that was attempted, it was usually the person in the group that had the least amount of friends, that was the most socially awkward, that they were trying to hook me up with. And, you know, people are unpopular for different reasons. So
well, if you don't mind me asking a direct question about that, because I feel like that huge issue with interpersonal relationships, do you feel even if you hadn't found the right person that's beneficial for your social development, hey, I got this for what he's, you know, he's kind of in the same place you are in life, and go on a date with him, or would you discourage that as something else?
You know, unfortunately, the video just skipped around and I couldn't make any head or tails out of what you just said. Can you try to repeat the question?
Sure. I'm just asking for your social. Do you think that would have been socially beneficial for people to just say, "Hey, would you like to go on a double date with us, or would you like to have a friend over here?"
Yeah. I mean, I was in a church where everybody was getting matched up with everybody by other people in the church, and nobody tried to introduce me to anyone. And it was like, wow, I guess I just have cooties, you know? I would have loved that. And I think that people need to, I think somewhere in the 80s or 90s, there came out this kind of singlehood that was sort of like, I am single. I'm so upset that everyone keeps asking me why I'm not married. I'm so upset that people keep trying to match me up. Leave me alone. Affirm me in my singleness. Affirm me that I am, you know, really powerful as an individual all by myself. And, you know, some of that's still hanging around, but I think somehow the church decided that that was the majority viewpoint of single people.
Right.
That, you know, most single people would be offended if you know, ask them if they wanted to be married, or if you tried to hook them up with someone, or, you know, I've seen a lot of people just be very reluctant to want to involve themselves in matching two people. And you know, I go out of my way to introduce every single I know to every other single I know, because I just know how hard it is to find people. A lot of times
it really is a shot in the dark, because you don't know the inner life of people. So
yeah.
Well, and I feel like we've taken this other path in the church now, and it's a horse of a different color, but it's the same horse. You know, like we painted the horse, like where we're like, singleness is a gift, and just be patient in your singleness. Like, we still don't want to hook people up, but now we're not just saying. Now we're not like we're just saying, hey, singleness is okay. Like,
I think it's really important to listen to people's hearts and not be trying to push their heart in a direction you think it should go. Right. There are people, I have friends that tell me over and over again, they are wanting to be single. They are called to be single. And there are lots of friends of theirs that are constantly trying to push them to experiment with dating or to, think about marriage. On the other hand, you have all these single people, and there's so much of a taboo for especially a single woman to say, I'm looking, I want someone, because one of the worst things in the dating market is to be seen as desperate, right? So by the time a single person gets around to telling you, I'm really, really upset that I can't find anyone, they've taken a huge leap of their own pride, their own, vulnerability to tell you that they need your help, or that, they want you to pray for them, or they want you to care, or they want you to bear that burden with them in some way or another. And
I think that the church does a really disservice, a huge disservice, by interjecting their own, God's timing, and you shouldn't be desperate because God's going to take care of you, which is true, but not helpful.
I think, you have the Bible here. You have Jesus making a statement about singlehood and, saying that to him who can receive it, it's better to be single. I'm not quoting him correctly, but he said that. And then you have Paul saying something similar. You have Paul saying that, I wish everyone could be like myself. And then he goes out of his way to say some have this gift, some don't have it. Right. But, he says, I wish that everyone could be like me and be content with being single. And of course, Paul might have even had a wife at one point because, there's a whole confusing dialogue there. But at least at some point, he's talking about being content, being single. And, that those two scripts are kind of pushed onto singles as, I don't know if it's, I just can't endure hearing your pain. There's nothing I know how to help you with it. Or what the deal is, but those two scripts are pushed by married people onto single people, right? And that's single people are acutely aware of that. They're acutely aware that here you are, you've got your 10-year-old or your 14-year-old child, and they're still trying to have hope that they're even going to have a chance to have a baby one day. And you're telling them, be content with being single. And, they don't know if that's because you have a bad marriage and you just think it was a bad decision you made to get married, or, like what the deal is.
Let's put that as number one. That should be the go-to for people. Yes. Of course you're saying that to me. Your marriage is falling apart.
Ted? Or, I've had two friends that in particular were like, one was, when you're not looking for it, it will come to you. I really appreciate Kate Hurley, by the way. She wrote a whole book about being single and all the crazy things people say to you. And I would recommend anyone check out her book. I actually forget the title of it.
But I'll look it up and I'll put a link.
Hurley, yeah. It's all about being single way past, your youth. Because, when the Bible talks about marriage, it talks about it as something that youthful people do.
Right.
It talks about the wife of your youth, and even where Paul is discussing singlehood, he says, if anyone has a virgin, I guess he's talking to fathers, if anyone has a virgin and she's getting past the prime of her youth, right, that it's time to consider getting her married. And so I wonder, if a lot of the discussion that Paul is making about singleness, he's actually saying, seasonally, like not that you should be wanting to be single for life, but to embrace a season of singleness. He doesn't really specify what's going on, but he does have that discussion about she's getting past the flower of youth, let her marry kind of thing. And he does say in, totally different place, he says, for the sake of sexual immorality, let everybody have a spouse.
Right.
I love Paul, of course, and we want to push Paul as much as we can. But something after being a youth pastor and a young adult leader and primarily spending most of my ministry life with young people, there's almost a desire for, especially young men, the ones I've discipled, there's always guaranteed going to be a point in the discipleship process where they state, I think God's calling me to singleness. I think God's calling me to celibacy. And it's so funny because you can almost predict within probably a few months of how far they're going to make it in that calling before they even start dating or start looking for someone to date, because it's it's very much, it's an immediate, I would say maybe even a spiritual sense, but an immediate response to, I want to follow God and I want to do whatever he has for me in my life. One of the easiest things to give up when you don't have it is a relationship. But
Thomas,
then,
Sure, and especially
real life happens.
especially if guys are picking up a copy of Shane Claiborne Irresistible Revolution, and they're reading through that, and they're like, he's got that whole exhortation to being single for the kingdom, and there's no postscript there that says, by the way, Shane is now married.
Right. They have to do a revision of the book to make that clear.
Thomas and I have accepted the fact that when most Christians say season, they literally mean like the 3-month season of fall. I think that they're confused. They're like, no, it's only 3 months. I'm going to be single 3 months through the fall. Come winter, I'm going to be looking. So
no, I mean, I do believe in seasons. I think it's a really good thing that I was single probably up until about the age of 25. And in that time of my life, God was making major changes from like one year to the next in how I viewed the world, what I thought my calling was, what I thought, I was supposed to do with myself. And probably anyone I would have tried to choose in that period of time wouldn't have been a good fit, because I would have been changing by the very next year. And unless they were able to change with me, I really didn't know who I was yet or what I wanted. But I think by the time I was about 25, I pretty much was mostly the same person that I am now. And and so, I think by the time I was like 30, I started saying to like my small group and, to various people around me, like, I'm getting really worried because I really feel like I'm called to have children. I really want to have children. And like one group told me, you need to let Jesus be your child.
What?
Oh my gosh. A little bit of Jesus in the manger.
That goes beyond the let Jesus be your boyfriend.
Yeah, forget the
That's a step even further.
Let's just go right to, he's my child. And I guess, he did say something like, whoever obeys my father, they are my mother and my sister and, something or other. But I think somewhere along the line here, the word hyper spiritualization comes into play. And because there are people who really do need to stay single for a specific call of God. I'm not going to venture what that needs to be. I have one friend in the UK that felt at 16, she was called to singlehood. She actually took a vow, and she's almost 40 now and very happily still single. Like she, doesn't regret her vow. But she lives in a community of believers that actually live together 24/7.
Right.
And so she has provided for her real family that's going to be with her probably till the day she dies. And most of us don't have church communities like that. And it's really not good.
Agree.
So, because I really do, like, we don't have a ton of time left. And I do want to talk about the IVF, but just kind of as we wrap up the singleness thing, it sounds like as you got older, it became more difficult and the church became less helpful.
Really.
So what can we do? Like as
I think too, community, as you get older, people start to see you more and more as just that poor person that, it's just going to be that way, know?
So what can we do as a Christian community with those around? Is it really as simple as, hey, I want to introduce you to so-and-so, like my...
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, on a one-to-one level, it's listen to the people who are single in your sphere. Like if they want to stay single, great. Don't bother them. Don't try to force them into something that they don't want. But if they want to be married, then bear that burden with them. Like, don't just tell them to go join eHarmony. Believe me, I've signed up for every single dating website out there. Or if you are going to tell them to join eHarmony, give them some money. Those things are not cheap.
Right.
Good job, church. Way to spend your money.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're already single. You're already trying to pay for an apartment, probably all by yourself. Your, car payments and all this stuff. And, being single is not cheap. I know being married isn't cheap either. But when you're, and I guess there's differences with singles who live with their parents or whatever. But, be there for them, listen to them, and come alongside. Like bear whatever their burden is, and network with others. Like. Pastors can be talking to pastors in other churches saying, hey, I've got, 5 single females and you've got 5 single males. Let's get them together.
Right. Cool.
So
Awesome. So
yeah.
fast forward to 2 weeks ago, and you're married.
I'm married.
And
It's
you guys
amazing.
are trying
So,
to get
so all that stuff she had to say
pregnant.
before is obsolete now because she's not a single person. She can't relate. She can't connect.
I'll tell you, at our wedding, we called all the single people forward, and I took my bouquet and I broke it into pieces, and I gave each and every single
Oh,
person
that's
a flower from my
nice.
bouquet. And I made a point of having the entire wedding stop and pray for all the single people that were present.
No, that's endearing.
That
That's
is
going to endear you
awesome.
to our audience is going to like you a lot more than they like us now.
Because single people are, expected
both
to go
kinda
to
jerks.
wedding after wedding after wedding and see all their friends get married, and nobody, dries their tears when they go home at night. Like, why isn't this happening for me? And so I wanted to turn our wedding into a time of intercession for all the other singles that were there, and we did.
That is
Rock.
fantastic. So we only have Thomas. You have to leave in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, but
for an appointment.
you guys can keep going however
Okay.
direction you want to go. I gotta do it.
and we can kind of decide this way. We can do one of two things. Heather and I, like, I don't know how much time you have, because I would hate to, like, I was thinking maybe we'll just do one of the biggest myths and one of the biggest truths about IVF. But we can either, you and I can keep going and just talk about your IVF journey, or we can record something in the next couple weeks and make it an add-on, and not necessarily an episode, but available after we post this as a Facebook only exclusive. Like, I don't know how much time you have right now, Heather, or what the
I got
likelihood
plenty
of
of
being able
time.
to. Huh?
I've got plenty of time.
Okay, I do too. I can stick around if.
Yeah, and I really want you guys to keep going, and then I'll look at this. I'll look at the show later, and I'll add notes to the page if I have to. But I'm excited to hear this whole story because I think it's beneficial to a lot of people.
Good.
Well,
So
just to fast forward, the guy I married, I think one of the ways that singles can find people when it's not working in their demographic is, to leave your demographic. And so the guy that I just married is actually 21 years older than me.
Okay.
So, if I guess if you're not finding someone in your marriage market, find another marriage market. Like, I've had friends marry people from other countries. For me, I just skipped a generation. So
that's a great line. Like, leave your demographic, and I feel like that applies to so many different things. Like,
right.
You don't know what your calling is and who you're supposed to be serving, leave your demographic. You don't know, like, if there's no other singles, leave your demographic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, we were friends for 14 years and just saw each other as friends, and then sparks started flying, and we had a very long courtship because there were a lot of things to be figured out.
Sure.
But we're very happily married right now, and even though we just had our big wedding celebration 2 weeks ago, I should mention that we actually got legally married 9 months ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we've been partially married 9 months ago, and then like fully finally married
Right.
2 weeks ago.
Cool.
And the reason the reason that there's so much time there was that my husband had prostate cancer. It's one of the more interesting things about marrying an older guy is that he actually had to have his prostate removed.
Okay.
And one of my biggest burdens was to have children, and we talked about it. And so we knew going into marriage that we would do whatever it takes to try to conceive children.
Right.
And so I'm doing IVF not because I have a fertility issue, but because my husband does.
Okay.
And yet I think it's kind of a blessing because at my age, the chances of conceiving a child naturally are very slim. Like, everyone knows somebody who got pregnant at 42 or 43. And I think those, incidental success stories kind of blind people to the fact that a woman's fertility is definitely markedly deteriorated by the time she's in her 40s. And nobody should ever count on, well, I'm just going to get married at 42 and, it's all going to work.
Right.
So I think, it's a blessing to me that I'm getting to do IVF because that enhances my own fertility in that sense. But we're really doing it because of him.
Okay.
And so we got married 9 months ago because I was already 42. And since we knew we were getting married, we didn't want to have to wait until our ceremony in the summer, because at this age, every 6 months makes a huge difference in
Right.
sickness rates.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I feel like talking about fertility and IVF is kind of like, I was saying to, was it you or was it Bruce that, or you are
Thomas.
Bruce, Thomas, that, there are words that are forbidden in like culture. And like one of them is like, yeah, like vagina is a bad word, but penis is perfectly okay. Right. And,
Yep.
and, talking about these sorts of things like pregnancy and IVF and being impregnated and sperm and eggs and all that stuff, it's like people start to squirm. And I think being Jewish, it just kind of helps me realize that this is part of life. Like this is part of, like real life. There's a story that it's a famous story that some rabbi told about some young guy he was discipling and studying the Torah. And one day him and his wife, the old guy, him and his wife were having intercourse. And as they finished up, the young disciple slid out from under his bed. And the old rabbi was like, "Oy vey, what are you doing here?" And the young disciple said something like, "But Rabbi, this too is Torah." And I think in the Jewish perspective, sexual topics are much more understood to be holistically part of life. Things that are not somehow taboo or, squeamish to be talked about. So, I think the church needs to embrace a little bit of Torah along that lines. Not that we should have disciples being under people's beds while they're having intercourse, but
probably not.
Yeah, definitely not. But yeah, so I realized stepping into IVF, like, as a single person before I got married, I was so worried about like, will I ever have children, that I started actually looking into sperm donation and at the prospect of becoming a single mother.
Which that probably carries a whole different set of issues than even IVF does, I imagine, especially inside the church.
It sure did. And I realized like that was, so morally questionable, the idea of bringing a child into the world without a father. And I was like petrified that nobody would ever allow me to be in ministry with them, that everyone, it would be almost like worse than committing adultery or fornication or something, that I'd have like a scarlet letter like stamped on my head forever, and that, my child would be at a disadvantage. And then, I looked around at the world and I saw, wait a minute, my sisters, they're not Christians. Both of them have children out of wedlock.
Right.
And it seemed like I was being punished for being faithful. The fact that I was still a virgin at 42, meant that my DNA would die with me and I would have no, line, no inheritance, at least in the natural. But, all of the people around who don't care at all about, abstinence or, doing anything according to what the Christian, prescribed way is, they're the ones having the reward of seeing their seed, of seeing their children and raising them. And even though there's grief with that, sometimes the kids are not turning out so great. Like, it was like, wow, like, is my line destined to die with me because I'm obeying God? Is this like some sort of weird cost of discipleship, And so I started really considering artificial insemination and everything that would go along with that. And I'm really glad that I didn't have to do that.
Right.
I'm really, because it's not ideal, but you know what? I think if a woman who's a believer in Jesus wants to do that and is going to raise that child to serve the Lord, like, I think I would applaud her and I would support her, and I think that stigma needs to be removed from the church. We either need to get serious about helping people find spouses or start to open up to understanding that these things are going to be what people have to turn to.
Right. So really interesting. I never even thought, and probably just because, I mean, you see what's in front of you,
Yeah.
but the idea that it would be like, from your perspective, that like, am I being punished? Like, or is there something wrong? Like, how is this person who's not doing the obedient thing, like not doing the thing that the Bible so clearly directs us towards,
Yeah.
that as acceptable and righteous, and I'm doing this thing, and there's the
Right.
reward, the seed of the fruit of their seed is right there in front of them. Yeah, wow, that's yeah, no,
And
that's
I
that's
mean,
kind
I
of a heavy
know,
question to be able to even ask.
I know
Like,
I know we can suffer for righteousness, but in my mind, like, God set up all these things in the Old Testament, like if a woman's husband died and never gave her kids, then, you had the brother impregnating her and stuff like that. And, it just seemed to me like God actually really cared about seeing people. Now, of course, it was all male centered then. It was about the male seed continuing. But, that God actually cared about people having children survive them. And, I care about that because I see the value of it. And,
right,
I think I was just torn in so many directions because I did want to like not be caring about the things of this world and, to care about the kingdom more than my earthly flesh and blood. But it also seemed like God seems to put some emphasis on that too in the Bible, so there were years and years of heart-rending, soul-searching. Can I actually bring myself to do this? Can I impregnate myself
right.
while still being a virgin, while still never having had sex with anyone, with some other man's sperm who happened to be kind enough to donate it so I could go buy it. And, it only costs like $800 or something to buy sperm, and it's from like a catalog, and
Really, that's crazy.
yeah. Yeah, there's websites. You go on them, you look at baby pictures of the men donating the sperm. Sometimes they'll show their adult pictures. They tell you all about them. They've all been vetted. They've all been tested for every VD under the sun. And, you can have it mail ordered to your house for $800.
That's crazy.
Or you can go to a doctor's office and have them impregnate you with it. And that tends to double or triple the cost, but then it also doubles the success rates.
Right.
So,
significantly lower than IVF, I imagine, though.
Oh yeah, significantly lower than IVF. So here we are. I'm very happy that I will have a father for my children should this process work, which I really pray and hope that it does.
Yeah, we'll be praying with you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And yet, I still get the weird comments about our ages,
So can you talk about that? Like, just like kind of how has first off, did people expect, so you're getting married at 42 and 63?
64. Yeah.
Did people just expect, you guys are just getting married to end your singleness and to have companionship and to be with each other, but you're not going to have kids? Like, that was that kind of.
Well, I don't think anyone who knew me going into this would have that perception because I was so outspoken about wanting children. But I do think people who have met us now, like after the fact, who, are meeting us as of December, we were married, at least legally, are a little, they don't know the long struggle I went through to, not meet, but to be in this relationship. And they don't know the struggle we went through as a couple, as we discussed the ins and outs of, me feeling called to the Middle East, him not, like all of the things that go into being a couple that are heightened when you're older, because when you're older, you've already got your life headed in a certain direction now. And, I realized that I'm such a complex person. There's no way I'm going to find somebody who actually matches everything that I'm about, that matches everything I'm into. So we had to find our flexibility with each other and what we could compromise on and what we couldn't. And, thankfully, I think we're both very happy that we made this decision and that we are married. But it took us too long. Now I'm 43, so at 42, we got legally married and we started the process of IVF because when a man has his prostate removed, while he can still have sex without any problem, generally, depending on how his surgery was handled, he's not able to ejaculate semen the same way that a vasectomy would cut that off. Having the prostate removed kind of does a similar thing, but it does it at one step earlier in the process, and that's where the sperm would be maturing in a fluid that the prostate makes.
Oh, okay. So I was going to ask about the ability for him to still produce semen.
So,
but,
he produces sperm, but not semen.
Okay.
So, so in his testicles and in the epididymis and so forth, there is still sperm, but it hasn't gotten to the prostate yet and never will because there's no prostate there. So it can't mature. And apparently that part of the process is what matures sperm into little creatures that can swim and that can penetrate an egg.
That's important.
So in my husband's case, he still makes really great numbers of sperm, millions and millions, but they're immature and they wouldn't be able to swim and impregnate an egg.
Hey guys, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up this part of the interview and call it part one. Really the second, it ended up being a really long conversation, almost 2 hours. Well, about an hour and 40 minutes. And this second half really deals with in vitro fertilization, the process they're going through, and some facts and myths surrounding in vitro fertilization, especially when it comes to Christians that might be considering it, or the Christians who know people and may not understand exactly what's going on in that. So next week we'll come back with part two. I hope you enjoyed this first part, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks. Stay odd. Thanks for checking out The Odd Show. You can follow Bruce on Twitter at bpags2 and Thomas at BlenderZen. Remember to rate and review us on iTunes and share us with your friends. Until next time, stay odd.